Hey guys, welcome back to Fire Creek Forge, where my goal is to build highly functional and beautiful knives and tools for people to use. This is my passion and it's my job, so thanks for coming along. Today this is a bit of a research and development slash continued job training, if you will. What I'm going to do today is try and forge what's known as a Damascus blade, and that's referring to a laminate construction blade with copper integrated into the build. What I'm doing here is drawing out pattern welded or Damascus steel that I've forge welded previously, and I need something that's about 1.5 inches wide and about 1/4 inch thick. So I've got my center piece of steel here, what's going to be the center piece in our billet for the edge steel, and this is 52-100. And then on top of that I've got some copper sheeting. I believe it's a 15 thousandths if I remember correctly, which should be plenty thick, because when you integrate something into a sandmai or laminate type blade and then you finish it out with the beveled grind, it reveals more than just the actual thickness of the material. And I don't want a super wide band of copper on this blade, just an appropriate amount. So this is my pattern welded steel. We've got it drawn out, cut it off into 2 pieces, and then clean it up. So I've left it thicker than the center or edge steel for our billet, and that's because I need to grind off all this scale on the inside, and then on the final product, the same thing. We need to remove all of the scale and decarb so that we can etch and finish out the final surface and reveal that pattern. So just making sure everything is clean here. You can see I didn't get my pattern welded steel drawn out as wide as it should be here, so it made for a slightly sloppy billet with the copper sticking out, which I should have trimmed that off. Went ahead and welded everything up here and got it sealed. So the melting point of copper is about 1984 degrees if I remember correctly, and you want to have everything sealed up. But I was a little worried about melting the copper. I know this billet wasn't completely sealed, so I started forging it at 16 to 1800 degrees, which in theory should be enough to bond the copper to the steel and accomplish what we're trying to do here. Now, keep in mind, this is not a welding operation. This is, I believe, what you would call a brazing operation, because we are joining 2 different types of metal, a ferrous and then a non-ferrous or copper. So that's what we're doing here, and I need to put a bit of a raindrop pattern on the outside of the steel, which I should have done earlier, but I thought, hey, let's see how it works with a red hot billet in the softer state of steel here, and it actually worked pretty good. Kind of trashed the drill bit, and I had to recondition that to drill steel that wasn't soft like this. So anyway, here we go, and I went ahead and tried to straighten it out a little bit, hit it with a hammer a few times edgewise, and I split it apart. So we've got a problem here. The bond between the copper and the steel was not what it should have been, because it should have held together better than that. So I cut it back to where it appeared to be bonded in a solid piece there, and then cut off the arc welds, which, if you'll note, are badly fractured, and that I believe is due to the high copper content because of the excess of copper sheeting in there. Well, it didn't turn out so good. Still did not have a good bond. I kind of just gave it one last effort, threw some flux in there just to see what would happen, and tried to squeeze it together, but it was a no-go. So what we have here is my 1075/15N20 on the left, and then my 52-100 steel, and then on the far right is another 1075 and 15N20 sheet. So you can see that scratching it here, get a nice soft reaction in a copper color. That's where the copper is. And then over here on the 52-100, there's a few spots where the copper bonded, but primarily there's no copper on there. So what I'm seeing is the copper at the temperatures we were working it at bonded pretty easily to the carbon steel, but not so much to the 52-100. And I believe the reason for that is the chromium content in the 52-100. Not that it couldn't bond to it, but it would need to be done at a higher temperature. So this is take 2. Rebuild the whole billet, repeated all the operations that you just saw, and it appears we have a decent billet. I kept things cleaner and had more material here because I did forge out my Damascus or pattern welded to the appropriate width as well as the copper sheeting. So a lot cleaner all the way around. Now at this point this probably would have worked, but it was still much too thick to complete the knife, and so I went ahead and tried to forge it down some more. This did not work very well, and the hammer worked even less well. Once I removed the arc welds on the outside to hold everything together, it kind of went downhill, and you can see I've got issues. So I cut off the end here, and overall this would have worked out pretty decent, except for the fact that I've got a couple of spots here, those dark lines right next to the copper line. That's an incomplete bond. So take 3, sort of. I had enough material left on this billet here that I welded it up all the way around, sealed it up, and now I just threw it in the forge. I'm just going to cook this thing. We're going to bring it up to the melting point of copper. We're going to see if we can actually get a good bond on this billet. I should have enough material left here to get the knife that I need out of this, but what you don't see is something that I wasn't recording, but I actually had some copper squirt out of the billet, which was kind of interesting. Molten copper, you know, at a bright red or orange heat. So it's kind of dubious as to whether we're going to have what we need to have in here, but it appears to be somewhat solid. So I'm going to go ahead and grind off the edges and inspect it and see what we have, if this is a solid billet or not. And it appears that it is. It also appears that the spots in which the copper was squeezed out, the steel seemed to forge weld together solidly. So that's interesting as well. But anyway, I have a knife shape here, and I'm going to go ahead and run normalizing and thermocycles on it and go ahead and complete the knife because it appears solid. I don't know what we have for the copper at this point, but at least it appears solid, and so it's worth continuing at this point to see what we have. Once the thermocycles are all complete, and again, looking at it here, I don't see any irregular or differences in the cooling rate, which is a telltale sign of improper or incomplete bond, whether it's a forge weld or a brazing bond, as in this case. Cleaning off the scale here, and we'll go ahead and do a rough grind on this blade. So I forgot to mention that on the second try, this is actually a 1095 core, because I surmised that at the temperatures I was working it at, you know, I should be able to get the 1095 core to stick well to the copper, just like the 1075 did. So I abandoned the 52100 core for the time being. I think it's certainly possible to use that, but the higher temperatures probably are going to be necessary for that to braze to the 52100. So we have a 1095 core here in our 1075 15 and 20, and we can see some copper in there out of the quench here, but it doesn't look super promising. I'm not sure what we're going to have. Anyway, we'll get this tempered up here, and now I can go ahead and do a finish grind on the blade and get it hand sanded and etched here. So like I said, the third time that I did this, I went ahead and just heated it up to the melting point of copper, and I think that's going to be important to get a good bond. And then what I would probably do from that point is go ahead and work it down at a slightly lower temperature, just below the melting point of copper. But one of the crucial things that I found in this is that you have a airtight or a copper tight welding bead around your billet, because you know, once you get up to that melting point, you are going to potentially squeeze that copper out. Alright guys, we're right up against the end of this video. I'm going to show you pictures of the finished product, so stay tuned for that. But if you've enjoyed this video, found it educational, hopefully, or entertaining, or both, consider supporting the channel. There's simple, inexpensive, in fact, free ways to do that. All you have to do is hit the like button, leave a comment, doesn't cost you anything, helps the channel out. Really appreciate it. If you want to go a step further, there's Patreon, links below in the comment, or excuse me, the description section. And then of course you can go to my website and look at the knives that I have for sale there. I'm always adding new ones frequently, so check those out as well. I'm going to say right up front here, this is not the knife that I set out to make, but this is a learning process that, you know, I've repeated with every skill that I've learned, because, you know, you read books, you learn from other bladesmiths and so forth, whether it's books, YouTube, etc. But until you actually go out and do the thing yourself, you don't actually own that skill. You don't actually have that skill. And so I'm investing time and money into this so that I have this skill, and that's what I've done from the beginning. So encouragement to you, even if you're starting out, feel like you don't know anything, you got to start somewhere. So gain some information and go out there and start doing it. You're going to learn stuff that you can't learn any other way. All right, guys, a little bit of an after-action review. Here is the blade, and you can see some copper in there, but I failed to get the this nice line of copper across the entire blade between our two pieces of laminate steel, so didn't quite get what we wanted. There's another couple of things, namely the minor cracks or inclusions that you see in the surface of the steel that are filled with copper, but I don't want that in my blade. So in the future, I think just being careful with the temperature control at which you're forging it. I was trying to forge it a little bit cooler than I probably should have to keep that copper from coming out or going molten, but I think the solution there is going to be keeping that copper contained and working the steel at the appropriate temperature, basically moving forward. So I think I'm going to stick with the 1095 in take 4 to try to complete this project. 5200 should certainly be possible, but just to minimize the number of variables here, probably do 1095 again on this technique next time. So the learning process continues, and this is a small sample of the hours and the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into these projects and learning these techniques and skills. So as always, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you on the next video.